Hey guys, so today I want to introduce you to two things about your camera and about photography. The first thing is ISO, and second thing is shutter speed. So these both have to do with how your camera reacts to light, and it will have an effect on a couple things, mostly whether it will affect whether or not what you're taking a picture of ends up blurry or very clear. And sometimes you're going to want things to be a little bit blurry, and sometimes you're going to want them to be super sharp and super clear. And when you understand what ISO and shutter speed is, you can tell your camera and give your camera a lot more information and make your picture come out exactly like you want. Whereas we've been using this automatic method, and so it's always the camera is going to make that decision for you. But there's sometimes where you're going to be smarter than the camera and you're going to want it to tell it to do something different. So the first thing is ISO, which stands for International Organization of Standardization, which doesn't make any sense because it should be iOS instead of ISO, but there's a long story behind it. I don't fully understand it, but anyway, we don't have to understand the history. But what ISO means, it's a setting on your camera, and it basically we can adjust it to tell your camera, okay, I am somewhere where there is a lot of light, like I'm outside and it's super bright. Maybe it's like noon and the sun is just bright, bright, bright. And so your camera will adjust to that that it has a ton of light, so it doesn't become your pictures don't become what we call overexposed, where everything looks blown out and it's really white. And you'll probably see that today when you experiment with this, what happens when you use different kinds of ISOs. Or if you're inside, or let's say you're taking pictures at night, or for some reason there's just not a lot of light, then you're going to have a much higher ISO. But the higher you dial your ISO up, the more you get what's called graininess in your pictures. And I've got a little cheat sheet and a chart for you guys to keep up with this a little bit better. So you don't have to memorize all this, but I'm just giving you a quick overview. So you got to be really careful that you kind of, when you start messing with all these settings, that you make sure that you don't go too far one way or the other, that you kind of find that happy medium, that balance with all these settings, so you don't get blurry or you don't get grainy and all that kind of stuff. And that's what we're going to practice today. It just takes practice. And the great thing about digital photography is that you can take tons of photos, and if they mess up, we just delete them and it's not a big deal. So that's ISO. Shutter speed is, if you think of the camera as kind of like your eye, there is a lens in there that opens and closes. And so shutter speed is how quickly or how slowly it opens. So depending on what you're doing, if you have a lot of light or you're trying to freeze motion, like somebody's running and you're trying to freeze them, you're going to have a much higher speed. You're going to want that thing to open and close really, really quickly. Now, if you are taking a picture at night or doing some other different things that we'll talk about, you may want it to open really slowly to let a lot more light in and to maybe like let it blur. So an example of that would be this waterfall. So we know the waterfall is moving, and if we use a really quick shutter speed, it's going to freeze it. But if we slow down the shutter speed, it's going to give you that really soft, blurry waterfall feel, which is kind of a cool effect. Oops. And then this is called a star trail. So we can watch, if you set up your camera on a tripod at night, or just set it somewhere where it can sit and be still for a long time, you set the shutter speed for like 5 minutes. So that shutter opens and stays open for like 5 minutes. And you can start to see the trails of the stars as the Earth is moving, which is really cool. Now this picture is probably much longer. This is probably a few hours, maybe all night. I'm not even sure. So we can talk about this if you guys want to take the cameras home. I know Cooper, yours is yours, so you're free to take yours home. But George and Michael, if you want to check out the cameras and take it home and kind of test this out, you're welcome to do that. We'll talk about that at the end of class. So, and then with the trick with the catching some things in motion, not only do you want a quick shutter speed, but if something is moving, you almost want to be moving too. So if I know a car is coming, it's going to zoom by me, I'm going to do what's called panning. And that means I'm going to like move as I take a picture. Let me kind of open this up a minute and show you. So let's pretend like there's a little car moving and I want to take a picture of it. So I'm actually going to make sure I'm in the frame. There we go. So I'm going to start taking pictures as it's moving. across. So that's called panning. So then when you do that, you really want to tuck your elbows in, guys, so that you get really still, and then just kind of follow the movement with your camera. And I'm going to bring in my tripod today. And that's something that you can also try with a tripod. So you guys might, one of you might try running and then have somebody else with the camera try catching that motion and see if you can freeze the subject, but maybe the background is blurred out. Play with the shutter speeds until you get, everything is frozen, or just the person running is frozen, but just like this picture with the race car, the background is blurry. So you can tell that the race car is going really fast because the wheels in the background are blurred, but the car is pretty clear. Same thing with things like hummingbirds and fast animals. You want to be able to decide, are you going to freeze those wings, or are you going to let them be a little bit blurry to show how much motion it is? And that's another thing you would want to adjust with your shutter speed. So this is what's happening when we say shutter speed. Is this video that I'm going to show you is basically, if you take the lens off your camera, which I don't recommend doing, because if you mess this part up, your camera's just toast. So we really just leave the lens on. But this is what's happening when you press that shutter release on your camera and you hear that click. This is what's happening. And there's no sound, but you can see it kind of opening and closing. They've slowed it down a ton so that you can see all the things that are like opening and closing, and it's exposing the digital plane to capture the image, and then it all closes back down. So there it goes in. So it's opening, it's exposing it, taking a picture, and then it's going to close back down. So, and you guys, if you want to look at this more, you can, but we'll skip that. I just wanted you guys to get the idea of what was happening. And this, I'm going to share with you, this was in the email that I sent. So what you can do when you go outside, if you want to have this cheat sheet, Miss Georgette said it was fine if you want to pull this open on your phone. But here's what we're talking about up here is shutter speed. You can kind of see so think of these as fractions. So this is they are fractions. I'm sorry, don't just think of them, they are fractions. So this is 1/500th of a second. So this is very fast compared to 1/2 of a second. So it's depending on how much light you have, it's got to be faster, or if there's a lot you got to take into consideration, because if you've got someone moving, but you also don't have a lot of light, like maybe you're in the shadows, you've got to really kind of find the balance between that. And that's what I want you guys to kind of test out. And then same thing with the ISO. So 64 is a really low ISO. That would be a bright, 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 bright sunny day. And then when you get up here to 1600, 3200, and so on, that's like, you're inside and there's no lamps on, you don't have a flash you can use. You're going to want a really, really high ISO. The problem is you start to get graininess on the photograph. So take a couple of pictures today with a high ISO, try some inside and outside, and just kind of see if you can start to see that graininess. You might have to kind of zoom in to see it, but just kind of experiment with it and see what you can see. So I've got one video that I definitely want you guys to watch that goes a little more in depth about shutter speed. And then if this is really cool and you want to know more, there's a second video that's really great and really helpful, but it's 30 minutes long. So that might be something if you want to watch at home, if all this is really interesting to you and you want to try some of the star trails and some of the, if you guys go hiking one weekend and want to check out the camera and try some waterfall stuff, definitely watch that video, because they've got some more tips and tricks on how to capture all that kind of stuff. But I will poke my head in and make sure you guys know how to find all those settings on your camera. And they're slightly different on the two cameras, I think, but let's see. Let me see it. So on the Canon, it's going to be this TV setting. That's probably hard to see, but it's set on TV, so that's shutter priority. And then on the Nikon and the Lumix, it's just an S. Okay, so you can play with the shutter speed on both of those, on all the cameras. They're just going to be slightly different settings. And the ISO on the Canon is up here, and I'll help you change that. And then I'll help Cooper, I can help you find it on the on your Nikon, and then Michael, I'll help you find it on the little Lumix, okay? Oh, we have a visitor. Say hi, Corinne. This is Myra's little sister. All right, guys, I'll touch base. I'll come in and check on you in a little bit, but definitely watch that first video. And then later on, if you want to watch the second video, you're free to do it. But it's long, so save it for later.